Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Project Infinite podcast, a podcast covering the entire multiverse of fandom, movies, comics, TV shows, video games. We got you covered top to bottom. I'm Rob. I'm here with Courtney. I'm not Courtney.
That's me.
Yeah, you're
That's
Courtney.
Me. Yeah, a little under the weather, but I wouldn't miss this for the world.
Oh,
so.
no, this is arguably the episode that the podcast has been building to for the last 13 weeks.
Yeah, somebody was bound to get sick, and I got sick first. So. But listen, being sick would never stop me from talking about Dune. So
yeah, so this is going to be our big Dune review episode. Can't wait to talk about this movie. Because,
I've been hyping this up since episode 1.
Yeah, for real. And this is probably going to be a little bit different of a review for us than what we've done up until this point.
Right.
We're really going to flex our kind of mental muscle here and really dive deep.
Because you're the writer.
I'm
the filmmaker.
Yeah,
so.
We're going to dive deep into this thing. But first, we have the news.
The news. So you remember that Trench movie that was supposed to come out?
I do.
James Bond?
That movie that I was like, what?
Why?
Yeah, why are we doing this?
Why? Well, now we know why.
Now we know why.
And now I'm kind of upset. So that movie was supposed to be a Black Manta movie disguised as a Trench movie. And man, now I'm a little torn because I definitely would like a little bit more Black Manta, especially after your Venoms, like all those villain origin movies that Sony's giving us. I mean, we just got the Loki show on Disney Plus. I think DC's right at the perfect time. I mean, we're getting Black Adam too, and Black Manta doesn't seem to be the worst of the villains, as he can get his own origin as well.
They did Joker too.
They did Joker, which is their big one. That's their really magnum opus of doing villain origin stories. So I would have loved to see some more Black Manta, especially if this was after his father. Maybe this was a prequel, or maybe we got some of both. But just what Yahya gave us in the first Aquaman film, I mean, he's one of the world's biggest actors now. In Candyman, I mean, he's in Michael Bay's new movie Ambulance with Jake Gyllenhaal. This guy, he was Dr. Manhattan. Spoilers for Watchmen. He ended up being Dr. Manhattan. So, I mean, this guy's got a solid resume at this point in his career, and he's just going on such an uphill trajectory. And I would have liked to see some more Black Manta. I know we're going to get more in Aquaman 2, but a little bit of an origin story, I definitely could have seen it. I can see why Warner Brothers might have been a little tentative and a little safe with this one and said, let's just cut it all together and just have him in Aquaman 2. But maybe they can get this back on track, and if they find the right director, the right writers, I could have some fun seeing him kind of take off a little bit more.
Maybe do it on like HBO Max or something, like what they're doing with Batgirl.
Right. Perfect place for those lesser heroes to kind of shine, just how Disney's doing with Disney Plus, having your Lokis, your WandaVisions, your Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Just those smaller shows, having them get a little bit more shine on the smaller screen.
And I think it would be a great kind of lead up for like Aquaman 2, right?
Yeah.
Since he's going to be in it and he's going to be coming back for Aquaman 2.
Right.
To kind of give him his own kind of hour and a half, 2 hour kind of promo, kind of almost. Did you see the thing that Marvel was apparently going to do with Guardians of the Galaxy before it came out?
No. What's that?
They were apparently going to do... Remember the Marvel one-shots?
Oh, yeah, I remember. Right. Like, Coulson had his one.
Yeah.
Right.
And they did the one about the Mandarin.
Right. The All Hail the King, right.
Mm-hmm. But apparently Marvel was going to do one-shots about each of the Guardians before Guardians of the Galaxy. So I wouldn't mind seeing something like that.
That would have been kind of cool. Right. Yeah, just seeing, like, we don't need Orms because Orms was so close to Aquaman's, but Black Manta was a little bit different, so I could definitely see a character like that. And maybe they adopt that for once you get further down the line, not even necessarily Ben Affleck's Batman, but Robert Pattinson's Batman, where you start to flesh out some of those other characters and some of those other villains, because his rogues gallery is just so grand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think that would benefit that character. I mean, the fact that they were able to pull that costume off.
Oh my gosh,
in live action.
And they refined it too in those pictures we got from DC Fandom. It looks so much better.
It's a costume that should not work at all in live action.
Giant head in like a swimmer's, like diver's costume almost, but it somehow works.
It looks super sick in
Aquaman
it does.
And now it looks even better in Aquaman 2, so.
We got some casting news.
Yeah, just sticking with HBO Max and Warner Brothers. Brandon Fraser.
Pulling double duty for DC.
Yeah, the Renaissance, if you will.
Yeah,
Somebody said that on Twitter. I love that. So he's rumored, so he's confirmed to be in the Batgirl movie, playing the villain of the Batgirl movie. And the rumor is he's playing Firefly, and I'm all for that. Brendan Fraser, I mean, he owned the late 90s and early 2000s. He was one of the it guys in Hollywood, of the guy you were going out of your way to make sure he's in your big summer blockbuster action movie. And I'm glad he's kind of back on that right track. I mean, he's in Doom Patrol, having a lot of fun. I feel like at this point of his career, he's just having some fun, just getting back into acting. You have Doom Patrol. He's going to be in Martin Scorsese's new movie with Leo. And I think he's in one more movie. I can't remember what it was. I know it's a smaller budget movie, but with a really good director. I know he's in. Oh, it's Darren Aronofsky. I think he's in his new movie as well. I think it's called The Whale, too. So, yeah, he's got a lot of great projects lined up, so might as well come back into the DC universe from a different side other than the HBO Max TV side. I know it's on HBO Max, but kind of like the Doom Patrol, which is in another universe, and have some fun and kind of play the antagonist to Batgirl. I'm actually kind of excited for that movie, not as much as I was before, especially after Brendan Fraser. And what Batman do you think we're going to see? That's kind of what the question is. I think I know where it's going to be now because of a rumor that's been floating around, but who would you like to see? That's probably the better question.
I think you might as well just do Affleck's Batman, right? Yep. I feel like Pattinson's Batman doesn't quite fit the grander kind of comic book universe yet. No. Whereas like Ben Affleck's Batman does, because he's interacted with all these like crazy characters already.
That was his purpose. His purpose was to form the Justice League and Batman vs Superman at the end, and then Zack Snyder's Justice League. That was his main goal. So I think because Commissioner Gordon is also supposed to be in this Batgirl movie, so I guess that's her father. So we'll see who they get to be the mother. I can't remember what the mother's name is, but yeah, they can have a lot of fun with that movie. I think that's what they need to focus on, is having a lot of fun, especially on these smaller scales, and giving people reason to watch these HBO Max original movies. And it's going to be unique because Marvel's just sticking to doing shows on their streaming service, so having that higher budget movie with a character that's gotten a lot of love over the last couple of years can really bode well for them going forward.
Yeah, and Batman's a good character to kind of do these kind of spin-off kind of movies for, because the lore is so deep and the rogues gallery is so deep that you can do a Batgirl movie and make Firefly the villain, and that's fine. Like, you don't have to go like A-list villain for a Batgirl movie. You can go like a Firefly, like perfect.
Yeah, and it's cool for Ben Affleck to be there too, because we haven't seen the 20 years or 15 years, 20 years. I think he said 20 years in Batman vs Superman. We haven't seen all of that, so maybe some of these villains are coming back, so he doesn't necessarily have to fight them for the first time, but he can give a little bit of exposition and also give a little bit of clarity to some of these villains that he might not have fully taken down, that somebody else from from the Bat family would have to.
Yeah, it's good too, because we've only seen Firefly in live action once.
And Arrow, right?
Arrow, yeah. And so has been one and done in live action, so, crazy character, got a jetpack
and some fire
and some flamethrowers.
Yeah.
So yeah, cool.
Yeah, I can see I can see the tragedy behind it. Like, I have a feeling that this one's gonna be a little bit more tragic. I can see a lot of people falling in love with this villain and kind of, resonating with him a little bit more. So that's gonna be really interesting to see as well.
Yeah. And then the other bit of casting news that we got, which totally blindsided me, is that Bill Murray is gonna be in the MCU.
Yeah. About time.
Yeah, I guess. I thought he was just kind of like not doing stuff like this.
He's in the new Ghostbusters movie.
Yeah, but that's like his thing. Like, Ghostbusters is like his thing.
Yeah, that's his.
Like, Zombieland was like his thing.
Yeah, I hope he plays the same kind of character he played in Zombieland.
So we should clarify that he's going to be in Ant-Man 3.
Oh yeah, Ant-Man Quantumania.
Yeah.
So we don't know who he's playing. It's just a mystery role. I have a feeling that this is going to be a super small role. Yeah. Like I said, like for the same thing he did in Zombieland, where he was just Bill Murray in Zombieland. I can see something like, maybe not that same thing, but something like that where he's just super small. I could see it being
in the vein of like Matt Damon and Thor Ragnarok.
Yeah.
Like that kind of deal.
Right, just like a funny one-off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like he turns around, like Paul Rudd, like talking to someone, and like turns around, it's Bill Murray, and that's like the last we see of him. Apparently it came about because he liked working with Peyton Reed.
Okay.
Is pretty much how it came about.
Cool.
Is really the only reason he's doing it.
Peyton Reed seems like a fun guy to have as a director.
Yeah, and I mean, he took over a pretty tough project when he took over Ant-Man 1, because he took it over, inherited it from Edgar Wright, who had a movie just come out recently. Yeah. You know, and I think a lot of people were looking forward to Edgar Wright's vision for Ant-Man 2.
And that's funny that you said that. Just to get off track a little bit, for Chloe Zhao to direct Eternals, I think that's what they were waiting for. I mean, what they got that a little bit from is from Black Panther, having Ryan Coogler. I think they were waiting for a director like that to hop on one of their movies, and then you get Edgar Wright. I mean, the guy is one of the hottest directors in Hollywood. I mean, he makes these kind of almost satire films, but his editing is what's top tier for that. And to kind of have a character that can grow really big or shrink really small, that would have been cool to see just edited out, especially with Paul Rudd on top of that. And I can see why Edgar Wright left, because I think it was creative differences. I know that's why Scott Derrickson also left Doctor Strange too, because he was probably pitched on horror, which is his bread and butter. That's kind of where he stays. And I guess, and I can see why the MCU said, we're going to do some horror elements, but we can't make this a full horror movie. And Scott Derrickson said,
gotta follow our kind of overarching major narrative thing that we're doing too.
And Sam Raimi also has a home in horror, and I think he was right there for the job. And they said, well, we can still have the balance. And I think Scott Derrickson said, well, I want to go full out horror, and they didn't want to do that. So I can see why Edgar Wright left for the same reason, that artistic style he has kind of being, mellowed out with inside the MCU. So like I said with Chloe Zhao, this is like the first time in what I've been hearing from Eternals where it does feel like a filmmaker stepped on here and kind of gave their influence of like their style onto it too.
Yeah, and we'll see how the general audience reacts to that.
Yeah.
I'm expecting kind of a divisive reaction to Eternals.
Yep.
That's what I'm expecting. I'm anticipating a really, really good movie and a really spectacular looking movie, but I think the general audience is probably going to be a little divided because I think it's probably going to be the most different thing that we've seen from the MCU to this point.
WandaVision was the most different thing, but then it still divulged into more, It went right back to, it was still a little bit more, crazy than the rest of the MCU, but still went back to classic MCU. So this feels like the most out there outside of the
with new
MCU.
Characters.
Right, with 10 new characters on top of that, on top of the gods that made the MCU. So there's a lot that they have to juggle in this movie. So, but I really wouldn't want a lot of other people than Chloe Zhao to do it. So I'm glad that she was able to do this as well.
Yeah, and then the last bit of news that we have is Ryan Gosling.
Yeah.
It's the Wolfman.
Yeah, and we were contemplating throwing this in, but this gave me a shameless plug to, one, talk about Derek seeing France. So if you guys don't know, there's this movie, and if you know me, you've probably heard me talk about this movie called The Place Beyond the Pines. So it was, I believe, 2012, and it was just this beautifully rendered movie with a lot of heart in it. It's basically Ryan Gosling. He's just working at a carnival, and he meets this guy because he finds out he's having a kid with Eva Mendes, and he says, I need money and I need to be able to support my kid. And Eva Mendes doesn't really want him around, so he takes up bank robbing, and it's this high intensity, high paced movie for the first act, and then something happens and it's super abrupt, and it just kind of, the narrative just flips to Bradley Cooper. Bradley Cooper's also in this movie, and then he kind of owns the second act, and then you just see how he's just a cop in the same town, and you see kind of how he's raising his whole family. It's kind of like a dichotomy between the two of them, that juxtaposition between, a cop and a bank robber that are in similar situations, just dads trying to provide for their families, and then another abrupt future shift to with their sons in the third act. And it's just this really beautiful movie that's just well shot, incredibly acted all across the board. I mean, Eva Mendes, Ryan Gosling, Mahershala Ali's in this movie, Dane DeHaan's in this movie. So just a movie I really recommend for everybody. It's like a nice lower budget almost movie that just has a lot of, Ben Mendelsohn's also in this movie, so a lot of great acting across the board. Looks incredible. I can't recommend this movie enough. But same director, Derek France and Ryan Gosling are getting back together for a Wolfman movie. Cool.
Yeah,
I'm all here for it.
I enjoyed The Invisible Man, which I thought was a really underrated kind of movie that came out in the last couple of years, because these monster movies, these Universal kind of picture monster movies, have been hit or miss.
Right.
Mostly miss. Yeah. In the last handful of years. You talk about your Dracula Untold.
Yeah.
You talk about The Mummy reboot with Tom Cruise. And then they kind of rebooted again to do The Invisible Man, and now it feels like they kind of figured out what they want to do. Yeah. They're throwing out the idea of doing like a shared universe thing, which was never going to work.
No, it wasn't.
And they're just like, hey, let's just make really good movies around these horror characters. And The Wolfman is a good one. I think it's a good get. Ryan Gosling is pretty spectacular. So I'm looking forward to that. And then I lied. That wasn't the last bit of news, but I forgot that this bit of news ties directly into our Dune review.
Yeah, it does.
And that is Dune 2 has been greenlit.
Mm-hmm.
Official. 2023 is when they're targeting this. And for reasons that we're about to explain, this is a really great idea.
Yeah, it is. They caught everybody at this perfect time. I mean, there's no big Marvel character that's getting a movie right now. Like, there's no Thor or Captain America or Iron Man. There's no Avengers to kind of counter this. There's no big DC movie to counter this right now. So they released it at the perfect time. And I mean, this is, like we talked about before, this new universe, it's so rich. A lot of people consider this the greatest science fiction book ever written. And there's a reason why. And we'll get into that a little bit. But I think I'm all ready to jump right in. And just to a basic, really quick review of the film. You want to go first? Give me your overall thoughts.
Oh, yeah. So, Dune review. We're going to start it right here. General discussion, so you don't have to tune out quite yet if you haven't seen the movie, because we're not going to spoil a ton. But first off, I mean, it's spectacular, guys.
Yeah.
It really is.
Mm-hmm.
It's, you immediately get entranced in the visuals. It sucks you in, and then you're just on a, basically, not a thrill ride, but you're on a ride from there. You know, it ebbs and flows, and the cast is spectacular. Everybody plays their part really well. Rebecca Ferguson, we're going to talk about probably in depth a little bit, was the particular standout for me of the entire cast. And yeah, it does a good job of balancing these really complicated and new terms that, if you haven't read the books, you're not going to be familiar with at all, because a lot of it is, again, it's science fiction, so it's a lot of new language. And yeah, I can't say enough about it. It was spectacular. The box office backs that up. It's grossed up until this point $223 million worldwide, $48 million domestic in the Americas, which is good, all things considered. It's the highest grossing movie in theaters for this HBO Max thing. It eclipsed, I think it was Godzilla vs. Kong.
Was it? Right, and then I think the Suicide Squad was third, I'm almost certain.
Yeah, I think Godzilla vs. Kong was the best grossing movie out of this until Dune. And then internationally, it's been making money since, because it released internationally before it released here. So that's where the bulk of the money's coming from. But and then critically, it's being very well received among critics, among audience members. The only knock I've seen on it has been the fact that it is a part one, which you're not aware of until you actually see the movie.
Yeah, and I think for people that are first starting to watch this, and by the end of the movie they'll be surprised that this is a part one. For people that aren't familiar with this universe, it does a really good job of, introducing you to these new characters, like you said, these new terms, but also using visual storytelling to its advantage. I mean, Denis Villeneuve is one of the greatest in Hollywood. I mean, you really don't... There's a short list of people where if you needed a project done, if you wanted it in the best way, he's on that short list, in my opinion, especially for science fiction. He's really becoming like the new grandfather of science fiction, and I think 20, 30 years down the line, he's going to be the guy that we look at as having one of the greatest science fiction runs from, I want to say, Arrival till now. And
Blade Runner 2049.
Yeah, Blade Runner. Arguably, a lot of people think that's one of the greatest shot films, period, point blank, period.
That didn't get a lot of commercial success, which a lot of people were afraid of this one. Right. And I mean, it's been kind of a thing with him in the past, with most of his movies, which is not a knock on him at all.
No, it's not.
Because his movies are spectacular.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, they have not commercially succeeded.
Some of his films are, it's kind of like the Christopher Nolan thing, especially on Interstellar, where it's like, is this movie too complicated for general audiences to understand? And I'll never forget when I watched Dune the second time, and I was just scrolling through Twitter, and I was just talking to, people throughout the last couple days, and they told me some of their different thoughts that kind of differed from mine. The whole kind of underlying theme, funny enough, was Marvel was the underlying theme. And it was... There wasn't enough going on, and then my immediate thought was there not enough action? Because I know it's a science fiction movie, but does that necessarily mean it's just a straight up action movie? Which it's not. I mean, No Time to Die was an action movie. Every Marvel movie you're going to see is predominantly an action movie. So I see why they're saying that, and it gets me a little nervous that that's what people's mindsets are. But at the end of the day, they're going to consume, some people just turn their brain off and have a good time, which there's nothing wrong with that. But I gotta disagree on this movie. This movie is very consumable to any audience. Mm-hmm. And the best thing for me is that it's a new universe. There's nothing tying this down.
Yeah, I think what trips people up is, like I mentioned earlier, the terminology, right? The terminology is scary.
Yeah,
scary terminology. But I try to explain to people who have seen the movie and don't understand the terminology. I just basically say to them that you have to look at those terms specifically and kind of break them down in like layman's terms so that you can understand it, because like you don't have to refer to everything by what the movie tells you, right? Like just refer to things how you understand them. So like the Bene Gesserit, for example, like scary term, right? But just space witches. Mm-hmm. That's it. Yeah. That's all you have to say.
But he lays really good context clues, and that's what it is. You just have to use context clues when you're watching it. It's just the Bene Gesserit, like you said, they're basically ancient space. They're just an ancient order of witches. That's all they are.
Yeah.
I mean,
Witch Coven.
Yeah,
but in space.
Yeah, the Gom Jabbar. I mean, she literally says it in the scene. She says it's the high-handed enemy and it's a poison dip needle. That's it. It tells you right in the scene. I don't think there's any point in the movie where it doesn't tell you the Kwisatz Haderach, which is a big theme that we'll get into when we get into the spoiler part. It's just the one. That's it. It's basically a god. That's all it is.
Which is yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's a trope that's gone touched for centuries, honestly.
Gosh, yeah. But there's, like I said, there's never a time where it doesn't, let you know about these things or give you context. And for the Kwisatz Haderach part, which I can't wait to get into, is what I think he does best in this movie, is the imagery in this movie is so beautiful. So without spoilers yet, Paul kind of has these visions. You'll see it in all the trailers. His mind starts to awaken and he starts to get these visions of possible futures, possible
pasts. It's actually funny because I actually went back and watched the trailers again, and it's not misleading, but the trailer is very misdirectional.
Yeah, it is.
Because you assume that most of what you see in hindsight when you go back and watch the trailer are the visions.
Yeah, they are. Yep.
You don't really see a lot of what's going on in the actual movie in the trailers.
Yeah.
What you see is a lot of the visions.
Right.
Which I thought was interesting because I purposely went back and watched the trailer after I watched the movie.
Yep.
And I'm like, they didn't really give anything away from the actual movie.
Didn't. Yeah.
They just showed you basically the potential futures, which is where I think people got tripped up.
Yeah.
Expecting it to be like an action movie because there's a bit in the trailer specifically.
Right. Especially in the second trailer, the main trailer, yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's a lot of action and a lot of like people running at each other and
Avengers Endgame style.
Yeah, there's that shot of Timothy Chalamet with the daggers and he's in the full suit.
Right.
And I think that's where people were expecting, and it's not what people got. So I can see how people were like, whoa. Right. But go back to what you were saying.
No, definitely that imagery point. I mean, just as somebody that wants to work on movies, it's a bit of jealousy, but inspiration to see what's possible and to not let your mind be kind of, crunched and kind of quenched of thinking you can't achieve this. Like, it's achievable. You just have to believe a little bit. And I know I tweeted this as soon as I saw it. This movie's inspirational to people that want to make movies, but I didn't say this and I should have. It's even to people that just want to write and create something. You can do it. And you see how beautiful that this was adapted to screen. Like, you can do that same very thing. And like I said, that imagery that he created, and I'm talking the imagery of Paul's dreams on top of just the imagery that we got on screen of everything. I mean, this is one of the best shot movies honestly ever, and I'll say it. I know it's kind of outlandish, but probably 10-15 years from now it's going to be the same thing as Blade Runner. This is one of the greatest shot films of all time in terms of sci-fi and just fantasy. It's up there, man. It's really up there. I mean, you got to think Lord of the Rings is up there with that, and this Interstellar, Blade Runner, that's the kind I would also say probably 2001: A Space Odyssey as well. Ad Astra's also on that list for me. Terminator, yeah, those big science fiction movies with just those shots you can just look at one shot and just be, awestruck by it. And man, I can't say enough about that. Just go into the cast. Everybody everybody gives a good performance. I can't pick one person where I was desiring something. I know when we get into the specifics, there's certain things that were definitely desired from a character's perspective, but the performance-wise, everybody was great. I mean, Timothée Chalamet leading this movie, a lot of people knew him, you know, from these different projects as like the teen heartthrob, which I guess he does get a little bit in this movie. It's not his fault, but man, when he kind of not hams it up, but when he gives his all in some of the scenes, especially in the middle of the movie and one of the visions he has, and the Gom Jabbar scene, which specifically was one of my favorite scenes from this movie, you really see why he is going to be like the next up. Like I always think of like him and like Lakeith Stanfield as like Jerome Jarrell as like the next like wave of great young actors that are coming right now too. Yeah, Rebecca Ferguson, incredible. It's like a dream to work with an actress like that can portray so much emotion but so much strength at the same time on screen. I mean, Oscar Isaac has this presence. He has this like kind of overarching presence as why you understand immediately why he is the Duke and why people trust him to be the Duke of all of the House Atreides, all of a planet. Like, you understand why these other houses trust him. You immediately get that from his feeling, and it's just that line delivery that he gave when he went to go get Arrakis officially. It's great. Gurney Halleck's Josh Brolin as Gurney Halleck, great. Duncan Idaho, they kind of serve the same purpose, but they're very unique in the same way. Thufir, amazing. There's nobody that gave a less than desired performance.
Dave Bautista, very menacing.
Yeah, and Stellan Skarsgård as Baron Harkonnen. Wow. I mean, you feel the danger and kind of like the fear that everybody has when he's in the room.
It's very like Palpatine-esque.
It is. It's very Palpatine-esque. Yeah.
From like the original like episode 4, 5, and 6 of Star Wars, is very Palpatine, very like dark emperor guy in a room like saying things in a raspy voice, but it works.
Yeah, it does.
It's a stark contrast to Duke Leto, Oscar Isaac's Duke Leto. Like, it's a purposely stark contrast because you got to remember that this book was written in the 60s. Mm-hmm. So a lot of these characters kind of fall into tropes. Right. Because more often than not, especially in the range of science fiction, these are the tropes. Yeah, they are. Yeah, a lot of people Star Wars pulls specific inspiration from this book too. Mm-hmm. It's very evident if you watch this movie and then you go rewatch Star Wars, you can see that down to the main theme of this book and this movie and to Anakin, you can really see what the main kind of theme was pulled from. But. Yeah, so like you also got to remember that too. Like when you look at certain characters and be like, like this is this trope. It's because this story specifically created these tropes. Yeah, it did. Especially in the realm of science fiction. Mm-hmm. So that's why maybe sometimes these characters come across that way. Right. It's because this is the innovator. This is the one that started it. You know what I mean? Right. So Lord of the Rings is very the same way. When you look at fantasy tropes, there's a reason why those characters fit those tropes so neatly. Right. In Lord of the Rings is because Tolkien was the innovator. Right. He was the one that created it. Right. So that's why this is the building block. These are the building blocks. You're watching them on the screen. Right. So final thoughts as far as general review, I would see this movie in theaters. Yeah. For me, it's the only way to see this movie. And it comes from the sound design specifically. It's just seeing everything in IMAX. I mean, visually, like I said, this is one of the most stunning films you'll ever see in your entire lifetime. I don't know if there's going to be 10 or 15 films that are ever going to look this good besides the sequels. So just seeing this on that big screen, but that sound design is really what gets you, and it's just from the beginning. You get this alien language as the first. It's just a dark screen, and then you get this really throaty alien language, and it's kind of like it's not a jump scare, but you're immediately amassed into why this world is so grand, because it's something that's alien to you right away. So just that sound mixing across the board. I mean, the sound mixing when he's in his visions as well and being awakened, like all those things are really well done. And then the score itself, Hans Zimmer gives one of his best, and that's something to say for his resume that he's had. Yeah. It's one of the most unique ones he's ever done, because I know a lot of people, there's people that like really love Ludwig Göransson right now because he's kind of different than what Hans Zimmer was doing. And I know a lot of people had got not stale on Hans Zimmer, but it's just, we know what to expect. This was not completely, but this was honestly the most different thing he's done to me. So yeah, he's at the top of his game, and just mixed in with the visuals just makes for an overall amazing experience. So I would recommend this movie
100 times to 100 different people. There's nitpicky things that we can always talk about, and that just comes from general filmmaking, writing, all those other behind the scenes things. But at the end of the day, it's the start of this new, beautiful, inspiring science fiction universe, with a lot of characters you can really latch onto and grow with over the next X amount of years they decide to carry this out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. So from here on out, I think we're just going to dive headlong into spoilers. And like I said, this is probably going to be a very different review from what we've done. It's not really going to be like a beat by beat. It's going to be more, we're probably just going to jump around a bit and talk about different points of this film, because there's a lot to latch onto. But at the same time, it's not really worth it going beat by beat, because a lot of this, it's funny saying this about a film, but a lot of this is visual.
Yeah, it is.
A lot of this you have to see.
Yeah.
Like, it's not something that we can adequately explain to you.
And it's honestly, we can't do it justice by just telling you. We can recommend stuff and we are going to give our thoughts on the film itself, but at the end of the day, like you said, this is one of those films you have to see. Honestly, I was stunned in the theater that a film like this was made, and it's not just because Blade Runner was beautiful to look at, it's just the narrative on top of this and the universe it's building on top of this. That's why it was so beautiful to witness.
For a property that has been long heralded as unfilmable.
Unfilmable. I mean, after David Lynch did it, I feel like there were so many directors, and especially probably in the early 2000s around the Star Wars time too, I guarantee you some studios were like, hey, you want to try to do Dune? And I guarantee you they probably went to a Spielberg or some other directors and they were like, no, we don't want to do this. It's too difficult and it's too much to do, and this universe is too rich to have my name be on it and me doing something bad like David Lynch did. So I understand, but it needed somebody like Denis Villeneuve to do it. It needed it. Yeah.
So, like I said, from here on out, full spoilers for the film, full spoilers for roughly the first half of the book,
right?
Which we're going to talk about. We are not going to touch upon neither the second half of the book nor the other books in the franchise, because we don't want to A, spoil the book if you're planning on reading the book, and B, we don't want to spoil any potential plot elements of the second film. So we're just going to focus on roughly the first half to first 2/3 of the book Dune, and full spoilers for the film, which again, I cannot recommend enough for people to go out to the theaters specifically to see, because again, I can't stress enough how important the visual aspects, which again sounds really funny talking about a movie, because, film is a visual medium, but the visuals are absolutely stunning. So from there, I don't know, where do you want to start this thing?
I think I want to start with the opening sequence, because it immediately immerses you into this world.
Yep.
And I think specifically, funny enough, it's Zendaya's voice that literally just puts you right into the world. So this film opens on what the MacGuffin of this universe is, which is the spice. It opens on just the sands of Arrakis and the spice kind of being lifted up, and it's just this incredible shot that just immediately you understand that this is important. It's the importance right away. It doesn't waste any time getting there, and it's just stunning to look at. Like, it's just beautiful, and I love that kind of juxtaposition of it, of, these big space battles that could be happening for the fate of the Empire, these houses, and it's just the calmness of sand and spice in the sand. It's a very
big contrast
to
how Star Wars: A New Hope opens.
Yeah.
Right? This opens at a very calm, serene, Zendaya's doing a voiceover, and New Hope opens literally with
Darth Vader raiding a ship.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
two totally different ways to introduce you to like a sci-fi universe.
Right. So we start with that, and it's just this beautiful shot, and then it goes right into your main villain, and it's something that Infinity War did really well, showing why your main villain is so dangerous. So it shows her people, the Fremen. So the Fremen, and a lot of this book, Frank Herbert deliberately was supposed to take from, it was a lot of Arabic meanings, and a lot of the terms like Gam Jabbar, Kwisatz Haderach, what else do we have? Muad'Dib. Like, a lot of that stuff was taken from, even the Fremen themselves are supposed to kind of mimic that too.
This is an allegory.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Essentially.
Right. The spice is supposed to mean oil. That's what it basically is. And it's kind of how these different people would go into the Middle East and take oil over X amount of years. So.
And also how the Middle East is kind of this kind of death knell for empires.
Yeah, it is. And what's funny too is they say right in the beginning of the movie when Paul's doing his research on Arrakis, it says the Fremen people are dangerous and unreliable, which, when in all actuality, it's really the Harkonnens, and honestly, to some extent, I know the Atreides themselves, but as a whole, they're still the Emperor. Like, they're the dangerous ones that are taking this. Like, it's not the Fremen, but they're just the ones in the way of this thing that can help them, further their empire. So, we see the Fremen attacking the Harkonnens. We see why they're so dangerous, and Zendaya gives us really amazing monologue about how they're on their planet just living. They have the spice. She said, my planet's beautiful, but all they see is this place where they can get this resource from. So they raid us, they kill us all the time with no repercussions for themselves. She talks about how the Harkonnens became super richer than the Emperor, which is super important, getting the spice. And then it divulges into her talking about one day the Emperor told them to leave and they left, and then it ends with who are all next oppressors be. So it sets up what the Fremen are like. They're this very religious type of people that live on Arrakis, and that's their native planet, that know it. They know the ins and outs of it, and it shows you why the Harkonnens are so vile and dangerous and just dirty and disgusting people.
Yeah, I mean, you see that thought, like I mentioned earlier, about the characters coming off as tropes because they are often the tropes. Mm-hmm. The Harkonnens there's no dimension to them other than oppressive and evil.
Right.
But they serve as a nice counterbalance to the Atreides, who are also oppressors and also, not world conquerors, but they are also inhabiting this planet that does not belong to them. Yeah. It was given to them by a higher oppressive force,
right,
which still makes them oppressors at the end of the day.
Right. So we open on Paul Atreides, Timothy Chalamet's Paul Atreides, which, like we said earlier, one of the best performances from him. And I purposely watched The King before I watched this, and I'm glad I did, because in The King, he's playing King Henry VIII, I want to say. And you see in that film, too, he has this, grandeur about him when he's playing these kind of dukes and these kings and these princes. And you see it kind of shine. This is where it, comes to the head of him, all of that training to do this. It's like The King was his prelude, and this is now the full story. So you see him in bed, and it's just a quick vision of Chani, Zendaya's Chani. And then his mother wakes him up, and it gets to the first thing about this universe, which you're kind of need to get introduced to. So we get the first time we talk about the Bene Gesserit, and the first time we talk about the voice. So the Bene Gesserit are essentially ancient. They're this ancient order of witches that kind of, what they're doing is, Paul even says, they're steering the politics. That's kind of their front-facing thing that people know them for, but the real reason they're doing it is because they're trying to awaken the Kwisatz Haderach, which is this super being that can bridge space and time and that can see past, presents, and futures. And they want to use that to, form the future. If they know what's going to happen, then they can form the future to that however way they see. And you see, just like Paul said, it's this ancient order that thinks they're doing good, but he sees right through. He says, it's not you guys doing good to make a better future. It's to make your own future. That's what it's to do. So
yeah, that's why the Reverend Mother serves the Emperor.
Yeah, she does. Right. So the first thing for Paul that you kind of see where he's different and he's, exceptional is he's a male, and the Bene Gesserit are specifically women, and his mother Jessica, who is played phenomenally by Rebecca Ferguson, tries to get him to use the voice. So this voice is, I believe in the book they say it's using your voice to trigger the nerve endings in people to do whatever you say. It's not like them mentally doing it. It's like the nerves in your body can't deny what's being said to you. So Paul uses it, and it's just this really great sound mix of, he's not using it properly yet because he's still new to it, and he says the thing, he says give me the water, but it's disconnected to his mouth actually saying. It's just a really good opening to kind of see that he's not doing it right yet, but it's this new thing that's kind of cool and this almost Force-esque kind of thing.
Yeah, and again, layman's terms, this type of stuff messes you up. This is essentially mind control.
Right.
Simple terms.
Right. This is probably going to be me saying the full thing, and then you at the end saying, this is the simplest. This is the
because ultimately that's what people need. I've said this to people that they're like, I liked it, but I didn't get A, B, and C. I said, what you need to do is you need to break these things down in layman's terms and then watch the movie again with these layman's terms, and it's going to make way more sense.
Yeah, it will. It definitely will.
You'll be like, this is this is that. Okay, I get this now.
Yeah. Right, so Jessica's trying to train Paul in the Bene Gesserit way, and he doesn't know this yet, but she knows. So the Bene Gesserit, like I said, it's these order of women, but Paul's a man. So the Kwisatz Haderach is supposed to be what they wanted it to be. Was Paul or Jessica was supposed to have a daughter, and the Harkonnens were supposed to present one of their sons, and their child was supposed to be the Kwisatz Haderach. But Jessica, and the Reverend Mother says that, I love this line from the book, she used her hubris to believe that she could, and Jessica even counters her. She says, didn't I? Did I not produce the Kwisatz Haderach? But we don't know, but we can kind of tell because Paul's visions are too strong at this point. So, and
he's the point of view character.
Yeah, and he is the point of view character. It'd be kind of boring.
So he has to be special?
Yeah, he does. Right. So
unless it's Game of Thrones.
Right, true. So after that, we get introduced, and it's a really nice edit to show the scale. So I really want to talk about Greg Fraser, who shot this movie. Greg Fraser, I mean, he's one of the greatest cinematographers in Hollywood right now. He shot The Batman, he shot this, he shot Rogue One, and the three things that those have in common are scale. And I saw that a lot in The Batman with those super wide shots that we were using for a lot of the trailer. You see the scope he adds to either these cities like Gotham City or these full out universes like the Dune universe. You see these small scale things like the simplicity of having, the spice raised out of the sand versus these, I'm talking planet-sized ships being able to transport vessels across the universe. Like, he shows that range. That's his biggest skill that he has. So he really displays that well. And it's a nice transition when Paul's learning about Arrakis, and then it's a nice transition right to the Imperial ship descending down onto them. And it's funny, I hate to use it, but it's the line from Batman vs. Superman where I think Lex goes, devils usually don't come from the ground beneath us. It's like they ascend from heaven. It's kind of the same thing. The Imperium ship descends from the heavens, and it's really the Hellbringers. That's like they're sending them to die, essentially. So this is where Oscar Isaac really shines for me. It's that monologue he delivers right there where he talks about there's no faith that we betray, there's no call we do not answer, there's no faith that we betrayed. We're asked to bring peace to Arrakis, and we accept. Like, that tells me right there why people trust him to be the Duke of their planet, and why they would trust him into battle, into anything, to this new planet, to Mind Spice. Anything they need, he'll get from him.
Yeah, and this is kind of where I want to talk about the book a little bit, because one of the big differences between the film and the book is that from the jump in the book, that this whole thing, sending the Atreides to Arrakis, is essentially a trap. This whole thing is a setup, and it's nothing other than that. The film does not do that, for obvious reasons. Right. Because if you know the twist in the first 5 minutes of the movie, why are you watching the movie, right? So they do a good job here in the movie of really making this seem like the Atreides are... It's not quite a trap, but you can tell it's going to be like an uphill battle, but not quite to the point of they're just sending them there to be executed.
Right.
They're sending them... It's done in a way that makes it seem like the Harkonnens are just pricks. Right. Like they just left them with nothing.
Which makes sense because that's their rival family, so they would...
Instead of it being like the Imperium and the Harkonnens are kind of in cahoots. Right. It's more like the Imperium is pulling the Harkonnens out, and the Harkonnens... at least the way the movie presents it, the Imperium's pulling the Harkonnens out, and the Harkonnens are not on with that. So they do everything they can to screw over the Atreides, who are going to be the kind of new incumbents on Arrakis. That's how the movie presents it. The book presents it in a totally different way. The book presents it as, I think you get the point of view of, we'll talk about Dr. Yui a little bit later, where in the book he's established as the man inside almost immediately. Right away. Book, where, you don't get that twist until later on in the movie, when we'll talk about that, because that's one of the stranger parts of the film, because I guess we'll just jump to it now. Because that character doesn't really do a whole lot.
No, he does way more in the book.
Yeah. Especially with Jessica.
Right.
Him and Jessica really establish a rapport.
Yeah, I can feel they cut a lot of the Jessica scenes, because there was also a scene in the book that I really wanted them to incorporate in the movie. So we get to this point where Dr. Yue, you find out he's the traitor, and he's the one that lowered the shield walls so the Harkonnens and the Sardaukar are essentially just the Emperor. Yeah, they're the Imperial troops. They're the stormtroopers. That's what they are.
Yeah, they're more or less. They're a little bit. They're like the special forces,
right? Yeah,
they're like the Navy SEALs.
Yeah, but they're for the Emperor, and the Harkonnens are still the Harkonnens. But you find out they're working together because they need to take out the Atreides. Because even Baron Harkonnen says the Emperor is a jealous man, and it's even presented too, which I like, is the Harkonnens have all this money, but that can't trade out for what Duke Leto has, which is influence. He has this influence over these people in these houses.
And you see those wheels spinning right away when he gets to Arrakis. Duke Leto's like, "Hey, we're gonna do something. Obviously, we're gonna mine the spice, but with the real resource on this planet, which is a really cool thing that really establishes why the Atreides are so different than the Harkonnens.
They're honorable.
Yeah." His point is, the spice is valuable, but the real resource is the Fremen.
Yeah, the people. Yeah.
We need to befriend these people, because then it's a mantra said in the book as well as the movie. We've mastered air power, we've mastered sea power, but we need to harness desert power.
Right.
And the desert power is the Fremen.
Right.
Which I think it's a really good through line throughout the movie, that Duke Leto's whole being on Arrakis is not just for the power, not just for the influence and the money and the spice. It's because he wants the Fremen, because he, for not just for altruistic purposes, he wants to weaponize the Fremen.
Yeah, he does. He wants to add that because he has the Atreides, and he's trained them with Duncan Idaho and with Gurney Halleck. He's trained them to be this elite fighting force that even rivals the Sardaukar, which is supposed to be the best because they're the Imperial Guard. But it's also, if he adds the Fremen, which they say they're some of the most dangerous fighters in the entire universe because they have to live in this harsh environment on top of having to survive, and they're very
like the Sardaukar.
Yeah, they are.
In that
they're like the savage version of the Sardaukar. Like, they're born and bred in the desert, so they know no other thing besides warfare, and not warfare, but more like, just survival tactics, and they need to stay alive.
So fighters.
Yeah, so it's really good that you see, but you see how they're honorable, but it's not. It's a forgiving honorable, but you still see why. He's like you said, he still wants them to add to his power, because at the end of the day, he's a duke of this entire planet and this entire house. So obviously you want to add advantages to yourself.
So you were talking about Lady Jessica before I derailed you, and a scene that you wanted to see.
Oh yeah, so talking about UA. So in the book, it's much quicker. In the movie, it gets right to UA, and then the invasion happens on Urkeen, I think is what they call it, like the actual house,
the city,
the city. But in the book, it's the portrayal happens, and it's I think it's what do they call it? The Hunter Seeker. The Hunter Seeker scene happens. The Hunter Seeker simply is just a small piece of machinery. It's like a small kind of vessel with a needle attached, and if it gets into you, like, it can burrow throughout your skin and hit any vital organ and kill you right away. And Leto even says the line, like, somebody tried to kill my son, like, don't, I think, because Through Fear says, I'm going to resign right now because I almost let your son die. And Leto said, you're wasting your breath on this. You need to just go catch people. They were going to do this regardless. I need you to help me catch people. Mm-hmm. And there's this point, because obviously Jessica's part of the Bene Gesserit.
I think it's in the book, I think it's Duke Leto says, the reason you didn't see it coming is because it's so simple, and we gave the Harkonnen too much credit.
Yeah.
We thought their schemes were higher planned than just assassination.
Right,
yeah.
Just normal assassination, right. And there's this great scene where Thufir interrogates Jessica, and Jessica, you see her power because Thufir is supposed to be, he's the master of arms, I believe they say in the book. He's the weapons master. He's training their entire
he's the Mentat, right?
Yeah, he's the Mentat on top of that. So Mentats in the Dune universe. So prior in the Dune universe, there were AIs, there were machines, which is kind of funny for Denis Villeneuve to have to do that, but there were these AIs, and the Emperor decreed we cannot have AIs that have the likeness of humans.
He saw Terminator.
Right, he saw Terminator and he got nervous, but he said we can't have this anymore, so he kind of said no more AIs in the likeness of humans. We're going to replace it with giving these humans. Humans that have computers for minds. So David Dastmalchian's in this movie, Polka Dot Man, the greatest. He's having
a great year.
Yeah, he's having an amazing year. So he's essentially the Harkonnen's Mentat, and Thufir Howit's the Atreides Mentat. So he's a Mentat, so a living computer on top of being the weapons master and the guy that trains their military. So, I mean, honestly, he's one of the most he's older in the movie, which I kind of like too, that he's older, so he's seen some stuff, but it's presented he's one of the most dangerous men. So he's interrogating Jessica because Duke Leto might not see it because that's his concubine, but he says
not his wife,
it's his concubine, which is honest, it's kind of important. So, and
she's a Bene Gesserit.
Yeah, and she's a Bene Gesserit. So he says they have their own motives beyond, just being in love with you, so you need to see that. You might not see it. And even Duke Leto says, you think I don't see this because she's my concubine and she's the mother of my son? That's not it. And then it's this great scene where Thufir's like in the chair talking to Jessica, and Thufir goes to get up and say something to her, and Jessica uses the voice, and I think she says, "I've not dismissed you yet," and he immediately like can't help it and sits back in the chair. I wish they would have kept that in. That would have been a really cool one.
Yeah, I think they did that because the film didn't want to hark too much on the subversion.
Yeah.
And the scheming.
Yeah. And also the mind control could be a little too easy of a cop out for some scenes if these characters just why can't they just mind control everybody? So Yeah.
So you don't really have time in this movie to do the whole whodunit thing. Right. So you just kind of got to do the twist. Yeah. Regardless of how it's going to land.
They need to get Paul and Jessica into the desert. That's what the whole first 2/3 of this movie is you need to get them in the desert by the beginning of the third act. That's what this whole movie kind of does. Exactly. And it does a solid job of introducing all these characters so you can get them to the start of their overarching journey, which we're going to see continue in part 2. Yeah. So before that, we need to go to Paul's first vision. So before that, let's talk about what I think is honestly maybe this and the other vision scene, the Gom Jabbar scene. So this is like in sci-fi, like this is one of the biggest pulls from a book, not necessarily for inspiration, just the actual thing that happened is like a really big thing that happened in books. So Paul is suspected to be the Kwisatz Haderach, but they don't know. They're suspicious of it, and obviously Jessica kind of thinks it is because he's having these visions and she's his son, so it kind of makes sense that he would be. So what she does is the Bene Gesserit come to Caladan right before they leave for Arrakis because he needs to be tested to see if he is. So Reverend Mother, what is it? Gaius Mohaim, I think is how you say it. Mm-hmm. I don't know who she's played by. I think Rob's looking it up, but
Charlotte Rampling.
Yes. She does such an incredible job of being, this witch. Like, she's kind of this, creepy witch that just has this kind of dulling power, if that makes sense, of like you feel uneasy when she's on screen. Every time she was on screen.
Oh, that's where I know her from. She's in Dexter. Okay.
Oh, there you go.
I think she looked familiar.
But she, like I said, she has this just unsettling nature about her, and that's the whole Bene Gesserit. There's just this, like, unnaturalness about them, and they're trying to do this unnatural thing by crossing these bloodlines to create this, super being. And when she comes to Caladan with the rest of the Bene Gesserit, it's this huge scene that's pulled from the book. Mm-hmm. And
the box. What's in the box?
Yeah, what's in the box? So we get into Paul wakes up, and you kind of see Paul's youthful exuberance, I'll say, shine through, because Dr. Yue checks him out, and Paul's kind of confused. He said, "Why are you waking me up at the middle of the night?" And Jessica's scared the whole time. She has this fear in her, and honestly,
this could kill him.
Yeah, this can kill her, but Paul doesn't know this. So yeah, this is easily where Timothée Chalamet gives his best acting in this entire film. This and the scene where they're in the tent. That's the two biggest points for me. So he gets in the room, and the Reverend Mother tells Jessica to leave, and Jessica's shaking, and she says, "You must do everything the Reverend Mother says." And Jessica walks out of the room, and Paul immediately says, "You dismissed my mother in her own house," and immediately the Reverend Mother says, "Come here and kneel," and just, can't help it.
Yoink!
Yeah, and what Denis does really well, too, in terms of the imagery it presents, is when he walks in, the camera cuts, and it's his legs walking, but then it goes right back to him and Jessica standing where they were, and then they replay that when he's walking up. So, like, he still can see things before they're happening. It's just very slight. So he is forced to come kneel before her, and he's not happy about this because he is a prince of this empire that's growing, and why should he listen to this crazy
old hag?
Yeah, this old woman that's, commanding his own mother in this royal house, but then you see her power right away, and he has to succumb to it. He knows what the Bene Gesserit are, so then the scene happens.
Put your hand in the box.
Yeah, she immediately says, and the book's a whole lot more in depth on how this happens. I love how the movie lets you kind of figure out immediately what's happening. She says, put your hand in the box.
She puts on a big clown face, and she goes, "Do you want to play a game?"
Nope, that doesn't happen, guys. He's joking. But yeah, he puts his hand in the box, and it's this really well done. It's Timothy inside the room. It's Paul inside the room with his hand in the box, and it's just this really slow burn of pain that he's feeling. And
meanwhile, there's a needle to his neck that will kill him instantly.
So she pulls out a needle, and the needle's called the Gom Jabbar, the high-handed enemy. They call it in the book and in the movie as well. And she says, if your impulses take over, your natural instincts take over, I'm going to stab you and you will die. I don't care what kind of bloodline. I don't care who I will kill you right now.
You can't call any guards because your mother's outside and nobody's getting past her.
Yeah, because she knows that her mother can take anybody that comes to that.
Because that's the other thing about the Bene Gesserit. They're not just space witches. They can fight.
Yeah, they can fight. And you see that Jessica can fight later in the movie too. But it's just this really incredible crescendo of pain that Paul's acting upon.
Really intense scene for the first act.
So intense. And that score that Hans Zimmer presents is just, it goes hand in hand with it. And it's slight, and then it gets more powerful. And meanwhile, while all this is happening and Timothy's giving this great performance, Rebecca Ferguson on the outside of the door, because she does not know, because her son could die because she had to take the same test, but Paul got more of it because they're the Bene Gesserit. Like, there's multiple of them. There's only one Kwisatz Haderach, so they need to test him to the limits. So she's outside the door shaking, and she gives one of the most famous mantras in any medium history: fear is the mind killer. I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear, I can't repeat the whole thing. Fear is the little death that brings absolute obliteration. I don't want to go any further. I can't remember. But yeah, it's that like huge crescendo getting to the end, and Paul's visions start to bleed through on it, but he doesn't move. And that's why I like that I watched The King before it, because he had the same thing in The King. He had that same type of pompous, youthful energy that sprung through of this pride that he has. There's this pridefulness to Paul Atreides that he has, and that Timothée Chalamet really brought forward. And that scene was just encompassing of all those things. And on top of that, Rebecca Ferguson just repeating that mantra to herself. I mean, I think she gives the best performance in this movie. It's close to Timothy's, because Timothy, especially once it leads into the second act, that's when he really starts, performing at the top of the game. But Rebecca, from start to finish, every scene she's in, every line she's in, and it's just the subtle movement she has, just the shaking she has.
Her emotions.
Her emotions just shine through. Yep. So that scene was one of the best that I've seen from this year. It's just a great lesson in how to build tension without action or without horror. Like, it's just this great scene of just, we don't know if this kid's about to die. I mean, obviously he's the main character, but you genuinely feel her fear and why she's scared too. So
it's something about like the closeness of that particular trial, like the needle, like right here, like to his neck, and like it's so. That visual is very tense. Like, it'd be different if it were like a sword to his neck or like a gun to his head. Like, something about like the needle is very, very concrete. You know what I mean? And
there wasn't any background score.
Right.
As soon as she put the needle to his neck, there was no background score. It was just him, her, and the needle, and his hand in the box.
Very dark room.
Yeah, and that was it. Yeah. That was it. So the trial, that's his trial to see. And they leave the planet, and it also leads up to a really good scene, but they're leaving the planet, and Jessica and the Reverend Mother are walking out, and that's where you get introduced to what the Kwisatz Haderach is. So, like I said earlier, it's this being that can bridge space and time, and that can see past and future. So
he's Neo.
Yeah, he's Neo. He's Anakin. He's the chosen one. That's what the Kwisatz Haderach is. So they have.
Because she believes it by the end of that trial. The Reverend Mother believes it.
Yeah, you can tell that like she presents it to Jessica as. He could be, but in the back of her mind, it's
because she goes to Baron Harkonnen later when she's like, "Listen, I don't give a shit what you're doing with the Atreides,
right.
But
Duke Leto or the rest of the house,
And she's like, I don't care what you do with them, but those two, the kid and the mother, have to survive,
right?
And Baron Harkonnen is like, yeah, fine,
right.
But decides to not do that,
right, right, and that divulges into a really good scene right after that where they leave the planet, and then Jessica's walking back, but Paul goes out into the fog, and it just shows this disconnect that Paul has from her, because you can tell that they're very close, like they're a very close mother and son, because he's training her in the way, but you can just feel like the love they have, and immediately you just feel it start to split, as that the only reason he was born now is to be part of this grand plan. That's what he's starting to feel, and you can feel this anger that he has, and you can tell
being used as a tool.
Yeah, because he's being used as a vessel to create this super being. He was never just himself, and the whole theme is we're just all part of a big grander plan.
And you see more of that later when they get into Arrakis.
Yeah,
and the Fremen kind of already think he's the one, because I don't remember if they make mention of it in the movie. I think they do.
Yeah,
that the Bene Gesserit have gone to Arrakis and basically deployed this religion.
Because Paul even says, when they're going to Arrakeen, he even says, because Jessica says, they see the Liz Al Gaib, and then Paul says they're seeing what they're being told to see. Yeah. Yep.
Exactly.
Yeah. All these religious connotations are really present and really apparent, down to the Fremen, to the verbiage they use. All of that is very kind of, you see it bleeding through this whole film, of Paul being this chosen one, this Jesus character essentially, his mother being Mary. Like, you can see all of this through the film too. And I just really love when they get to Arrakis for the first time, and you see it's not even when they land and it's like the Atreides part of like this royal grand army and this family landing. It's like the religious part of it, of these people immediately arriving, and they see this person and they see their god essentially, because it's Shai Hulud, which is the sandworm, and it's Lisan Al Gaib is like the one that will lead them into the future. So they did that really well.
Except when you get to like the higher up in the Fremen that are like, okay,
they're skeptical of it.
Because why would you be?
Yeah, right. Because the Fremen people themselves, at a base level, all of them, like, and the Bene Gesserit, like you said, they were laying their groundwork, because at the end of the day, they steer the politics of the Imperium. That's what they do, to make sure they can get these bloodlines to cross. But then once they get there, even what you get later in the film, Zendaya even tells him, I don't think you're the Lisan Al Gaib. You look like a boy, because we have this idea of what a god should look like, and then
you ain't it, partner.
Yeah, you ain't it. Yeah.
You're not that guy, pal.
Yeah, you're not that guy, pal. You're not that guy. So yeah, you want to talk about the fate of Duke Leto?
Yeah, so dead. Dead is his fate.
Yeah.
And, as it was ordained and as it was meant to be, he is betrayed by Dr. Yui again. But Dr. Yui, was not a complicit partner in this. He was under the pretenses that the Harkonnen had his wife, who wouldn't do anything for the woman that they love. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's important to note that he is an Imperial, and he's been given Imperial, quote-unquote, Imperial conditioning, so he's basically mandated to do no harm, essentially. The Imperium, or the Harkonnens obviously work their way around that by threatening his family.
Right.
So, and he's not the one doing the harm, he's just doing, like, the passive acts.
Right.
Lowering the shields, betraying Duke Leto, sets him up on a silver platter to the Harkonnens, but gives Duke Leto an out, gives him a poison mist?
Yeah, tooth.
Like a poison mist?
Yeah, so he replaces one of his back teeth with a fake tooth that emits a poison if you get close enough to... Well, I mean, the whole room essentially died, but...
And that's exactly what happens. But Dr. Yui says, you do this and it will kill you, and, but you're dead anyway, so you might as well just go out this way.
Right, and they kind of tease that when... So after this, we'll talk about, I just want to go back one more time before we go into the back half of the second act and the third act. But in this, you see, they kind of tease it. So the scene where they go out to the desert because Duke Leto, like an honorable man, says, because it's like the George Washington trope, like, let me lead my men. I'm not going to sit behind like a desk and lead my men. I'm going to physically lead my men. So he goes out to the deserts to see the sand, to see the...
Like the mining.
Yeah, the mining of the spice, right. Yeah. So they see...
carrier facility thing.
Right. And you see, where's all the silos? Why are they not filled? Again, the Harkonnen sabotage. And they go out there.
Of course.
Yeah, and it just really quickly shows the honorable nature of Duke Leto, too, because he even says in there, I think he says right there, damn the spice. I don't care.
Because the sandworm's coming.
Yes.
That's the whole conceit of this scene. That's what this scene is basically big action set piece, and to show how honorable Duke Leto is.
Yeah.
And that giant sandworm, great looking sandworm, by the way.
That's a really layered scene too, but continue, yeah.
Great looking sandworm is bearing down on the facility, and everyone's kind of like nonchalant about it because like this happens all the time. Right. So we just bring in the thing, lit the thing, and it's gone. But the thing comes in. This scene deviates so heavily from the book, but it's because it's a movie. And then like the crane breaks. It's very. I think I made the comparison to Deepwater Horizon.
Oh yeah, you did. Yeah, right.
Like the crane breaks and like it can't lift the thing, and Duke Leto's like, "All right, evacuate all those people. We'll take a loss on the crawler," and everyone's like, "Huh?"
Yeah.
Like,
yep.
The spice is. He's like, "Nah, to hell with the spice. Yeah. Save the men."
Right.
And that's what he does.
Right. So, like I said, the scene's very layered. So I want to say there's 3 pieces of the scene. There's the Duke Leto showing his true nature and why the Atreides are so, honored amongst the entire Imperium and feared by the actual Emperor himself, because he is a good man at heart. His nature is to be good and to show that we can lead into this great future if you join his house, And then it also shows the sandworm. So Shai Hulud, the sandworm, why the Fremen believe them to believe the sandworm to be a god, and why, and just a regular term, it's a giant sandworm that's coming. Like
it's a giant monster.
Yeah, it's a giant monster that's coming. So we need to evacuate.
That swallows a whole freaking mining facility.
Right. I think he said 400 meters. Like, this thing is absolutely massive. Like, it's crazy how big they are. And then the third piece is it's his first awakening. So
which doesn't happen in the book.
No, it doesn't. But I like that it happened in the movie because it just really allowed them to flex their muscles visually to finally get the first. This is like the first time you see the visions, a little bit more extended version, because you're getting teased it a little bit and then it gets here and it's like, this is the first time it's like a full vision he's having. So we get there and Paul gets out of so it's 3 ornithopters, I believe they call them. Really cool.
They're dragonfly helicopters.
Yeah, dragonfly, basically. Right. They look really good.
Again, we're doing that thing.
Right.
Yeah, and it's a dragonfly helicopter.
Right. I mean, the production design and the costume design on this. Sick. I mean, if this doesn't win at the Oscars for at least production design and costume design, I'm gonna be a little, a little taken aback. But the third, like I said, this third part is to awake Paul to be the Kwisatz Haderach. So he gets out, and the spice he already has these visions, but the spice elevates it. So the spice it's this huge kind of wave of sand hitting him, and everybody else has masks on, but he doesn't put his mask up on.
The spice is like, it's a drug.
Yeah.
Essentially, it's a lot of things. It's many things.
Yeah, it can heal. The spice can heal. It gives you the blue eyes that are very,
when you consume enough of it.
Right.
Yeah.
And the Fremen are always in the desert, so they call it the eyes of Ibad. So it's that. It gives you prolonged life, but to somebody that already is having prescient visions to be the Kwisatz Haderach, it's like a psychoactive chemical, so it's enhancing his abilities on top of how powerful they already are. So he gets there and it gets hit, and it's just he sees Zendaya's Chani just walking in this white gown across the desert. He sees kind of palm trees on fire, so he's seeing possible futures. That's important. He's not seeing the definitive future. He's seeing possible futures that could happen. And then it just, I told you this when we walked out of the theater, it's so simple that you can miss it, but it's a really good filmmaking to show like the disconnect between what's real and what's reality. And I know they have that line with Jason Momoa. It's when he's kneeling on the sand after they check all the ornithopters, and Paul's the only one that's not there, and Josh Brolin runs out to get him. And before in the movie, when he was walking into his room when they were doing the training, he says to him, "I know your footsteps." And then when Paul's in the sand here, he says, "I know your footsteps, old man." And then the camera cuts back to him grabbing him. So it's like you can feel his vision and that kind of outside perception and the actual reality of what's happening. It's super small and something that can just be overlooked, but that's the stuff I eat up to the end of the day. It's just this. That's what I call visual storytelling. That's what that is for me.
Yep, I agree. So we get to that scene with Duke Leto where Dr. Yugi lowers the shields, the Harkonnens and the Sardaukar invade. In the books, it's a little different, and so far as the Sardaukar are disguised as Harkonnen troops, so you think it's just the Harkonnens, but in the film, it's very apparent that this is an Imperial and Harkonnen co-led assault on the Atreides, basically.
And again, I understand why they did it for the general audience to know that the Emperor's helping the Harkonnens, versus if you can't tell the difference, then why would you even know?
It's just a war between families.
Right. And it helps because that shows how grand this grand scheme is that the Emperor is laying, if he's willing to put his own soldiers on top of the Harkonnens, like the Atreides really want to be taken out if that's the case, and they present that really
essentially
well.
the goal is the total extermination of the Atreides, and they pretty much do it.
Yeah, they do,
including a real badass scene from Jason Momoa's Duncan, Idaho, where he goes toe to toe against 10 or 15 Sardaukar, and that's what you realize. The film kind of explains this to you, that the Sardaukar are the elite of the elite, and Duncan, Idaho is basically the elite of the Atreides. Yeah. And he goes mano a mano with about 10 to 15 of these guys in like a little hallway. And this is another vision that Paul sees.
Yep. Wait, not yet.
Well, he saw it earlier.
Not
he told
that
Duncan
part.
About it.
The later part.
When he dies.
Yeah.
You're talking about, yeah.
Oh, okay.
I'm talking about when Duncan dies.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying.
Paul saw that.
Right.
He thought Duncan was going to die on the excursion to Arrakis.
Right.
Which is why he wanted to go with him. What he didn't realize he was seeing was this scene playing out with Duncan in the hallway when he is killed. Right. Defending Paul and Jessica and the ecologist.
Yeah, so Liet Kynes, let's talk about, what's her name in real life? It's Catherine Duncan Brewster, I believe is her name. I'm pretty sure that's what her name is. I know Sharon Duncan Brewster, right. She does a great job as Liet Kynes, gender bent and race bent character, which makes more sense because she blends in with the Fremen much more in that case. She does a really amazing job as the bridge between the Fremen and the actual Imperium itself, because she's the Imperial ecologist. But Paul even says later, I saw a vision, and you see Paul's powers are starting to grow because he says, I saw the Fremen warrior that you love. That's why you have so much feeling for the Fremen. That's why you're so encapsulated in this race, in this religion, because of this. Like, I saw the man you love die. I know that's why you're fighting to protect us, even though the Emperor told you not to do this, to make sure you don't see anything. You're basically just turning a blind eye to a genocide.
Yeah, and that's what happens, is essentially a genocide. And Paul and Jessica are sent on the run a couple times. Yeah. The first time they get out of it, Jessica uses the voice, and her and Paul have kind of an out in the tent, and then they're found by Duncan. Fast forward a little bit, and that's where Duncan is killed later on, defending Paul and Jessica, and then they're out on the run again. Mm-hmm. And at this point, you kind of know, because the runtime is getting up there, you know this movie is going to end with Paul finding the Fremen. Right. Which is what this whole movie's leading up to, which is where people get confused right about it. But I think you can pretty early on that this is where this movie is going to end. Yeah,
that he's going to end up in the desert. He was decreed the whole Atreides
like, this movie was never going to end with him defeating the Harkonnens.
No, yeah, it was too big of a movie to encapsulate in 1 2 hour and almost 40-minute movie, which is crazy to say. But before we get to the third act where he finds the Fremen finally, I just want to talk about the other display of Timothée Chalamet, and that's in the most apparent vision scene that he had outside of the third act when he finally fights Jamis. Is they're in the tent, so they get away from the Harkonnens. Jessica uses, and Paul also uses the voice effectively for the first time. He uses the voice.
Mm-hmm. Big hero moment.
Right. And you need those in a theatrical release. So they're in a tent. You find out Dr. Yue gives them essentially a kit to survive. He just doesn't give them what are the suits called? The still suits. Yeah, he doesn't give them a still suit.
He's like, hey, feel real bad about betraying your entire family. Here's a survival kit.
Yeah, so it's a really great scene because that scene's intercut with the demise and the end of Duke Leto, because Paul's opening all these things, and it's also intercut with Baron Harkonnen killing Dr. Yue and having Duke Leto dead to rights and telling him, I'm about to end your entire bloodline. We've killed your wife and your son, or your concubine and your son. Yeah, we've taken out your entire fighting force. We've taken out your heir and your concubine. Like, you have nothing else to live for. You don't have anything. And Paul's opening these things. He's finding survival pieces, and then he finds Duke Leto's ring. He finds his ring, which has the Harkonnen seal on it, the eagle, and Duke Leto kills the entire room, everybody in the room.
Except for Baron Harkonnen.
Except for Baron, who survives. And at the moment, you think that, common misdirect, you think that he dies, but he doesn't. So after that, there's sand in the spice. And like we said earlier, spice is a
sand,
it's a psychoactive chemical. And Paul already being cognizant and having those mental powers, it's enhancing it. So his visions are becoming stronger and stronger. So it's almost presented as he's becoming sick because he's getting he's overdosing almost on this spice. Yeah. He's getting too much of it as once. So essentially what he sees is it's a really well rendered scene of what the future of this franchise could hold. Don't want to say anything beyond that, but what the future could be, because he's seeing possible future. So you see Chani on kind of on a sand cliff, and she's walking, and she kind of is smiling at the camera, and then you pan down, and it's the Sardaukar versus a fully realized Fremen force with Paul leading them, and it's Paul, and this is the later part is taken from the book, but it's Paul in the sand, and it was that really big trailer shot from the main trailer where he's in that golden suit with the rest of the Fremen coming out of the dirt, taking on the Sardaukar, taking them out, and you kind of feel like this is...
he has the blue eyes.
Yeah, he has the blue eyes, so he has the eyes of Ibad too, so you can tell that this is the fullest realized, this is the Muad'Dib, this really is their god, essentially. And Paul starts to say, and this is taken right from the book, this is a holy war in my father's name. This is a war from the fanatical legions are worshiping my father's skull. These legions are worshiping my name, and you see him in a ship and the entire Fremen fleet kind of worshiping this god and Chani and him, and he's fearful of he immediately becomes scared of this because he says, this is not what I wanted and I intended. I didn't want to be this kind of messiah that leads, honestly, the universe into ruins, because they fight for any word that I say. And it's funny to go back a little bit. Frank Herbert, in an interview, he said that he wanted Paul Atreides to not be a typical hero that does the good thing all the time. The whole point was to be, especially in the next book, Dune Messiah, he even said it, the whole purpose is he's supposed to be presidents of we see these people and we're supposed to follow these people. And no matter what they say, we're supposed to follow these people. So he wanted that same thing. We want to go to Vietnam, we're going to Vietnam. Doesn't matter what anybody says. This person told me to do it. This Messiah leader told me to do that. We were tricked into believing this thing. And that's what Frank Herbert was deliberately doing with Paul Atreides, which I really like. I want to see this darker side of Timothée Chalamet really come out in the second movie too.
Yeah, so, this kind of sets him on his hero's journey. It's, it's funny that, you call back to Star Wars, but Star Wars really pulls from this story where, Star Wars A New Hope, Luke Skywalker is just regular run-of-the-mill Luke Skywalker, and then by the end of The New Hope, he's sent on his hero's journey.
Yeah, and
this does exactly the same thing.
That's why Star Wars is one of... A New Hope, I always say that's my favorite Star Wars movie, because it does so deliberately send him on that journey. I mean, him looking at... And I think they kind of mimicked the shot, which is cool. They paid homage to him looking at the dual suns in A New Hope, and Paul looking out at the sun, which is supposed to be kind of his stand-in for Arrakis that he's going to. But no, go on. That vision and him meeting the Fremen is what sends him on his hero's journey, and it's quite literally a hero's journey, because he and Jessica are trekking the dangerous sands to find the Fremen. Right. And he's like, look, it's going to be hard, but we're going to find them eventually. We will. Right. And they do. They come across this band of Fremen led by Stilgar, who we saw in the film earlier. Right, so Stilgar, Jason Momoa's character, which we haven't talked about yet. Again, Jason Momoa is that dude bro that we know from being Aquaman and being in Game of Thrones. He's that big body. This is the hero.
He's the quote unquote hero of Dune.
Yeah.
He's the one with all the skills.
Yeah, he's the knight.
Exactly.
He's the knight.
Yes.
This is the most tamed and the best possible way Jason Momoa has been in his entire career for me. This is where he really calms himself a bit. And I mean, a lot of that comes from the way they shoot them. And this is just another filmmaker thing that I really love they did, which pertains to the imagery. There's a couple of points in the movie, and they do it when he's talking to him on Caladan, where he's telling him, I saw you die in my dreams. And and he tells him, I see you find the Fremen, and it immediately cuts to like that B-roll shot of him with the Fremen, just this really nice HD shot of them, and it's just those little things, but it's the way that he's presented in this movie is so Knight-esque. That's the best way to explain it. Like you really feel like he would do anything for this house. You need somebody like that by your side.
I said this to you a couple of days ago. It's the most reserved I've seen him in a performance since Game of Thrones, since he was Khal Drogo.
Right.
And he kind of serves, I mean, Khal Drogo is obviously more savage than Duncan Idaho, but it's a similar purpose where like Khal Drogo, when he meets Daenerys Targaryen, he is immediately changed to the point where he would do anything for this woman, and he essentially dies in her name, accidentally, but he still dies essentially for her, and he took his people where no one thought he could take his people for this woman. And Duncan has the same type of, you see the same type of passion in Jason Momoa's performance that you saw Khal Drogo caring for Daenerys Targaryen, that you see Duncan Idaho caring for Paul Atreides. It's the same very kind of measured performance from him. He has his like moments where he's like, it's in the trailer where he talks about, did you put it in a muscle or something? And he's like, did I? He's like, no.
Yeah, even the scene like where it's like the ritual thing where Stilgar spits on the ground, and then they're ready just to like cut Stilgar in half, and then Duncan says, thank you for your body's moisture that's so rare on Arrakis, and then he spits. Like it's the Jason Momoa thing, but like you said, it's the most reserved, it's the most calm, but it's the most passionate he's been. So I really loved him in this movie. But getting back to
Paul finding Stilgar.
Yeah, Paul finding Stilgar. When you find those people, it's Stilgar's presented in a way where you can kind of tell that like he's kind of at his wit's end almost with his people. Like you can tell that they're not loving everything that he's been doing, and they might not have loved the fact that he gave shelter to Duncan Idaho's character earlier, because that's where that comes from. So he does find the Fremen because they sent an advanced team, and Duncan went on the advanced team with Thufir to make sure they secure House Arkeen, and 2, they find the Fremen. Like Duke Leto said, like we need to cultivate desert power. Like that's more important than the spice itself, is to make sure we add them to our fighting force. So.
And of course you would send Duncan because he's, again, like you said, like the knight character. And you see that rapport. And you see that kind of backlash with the Fremen too when they come across Paul and Jessica. They're like, see, like, look what you did.
Yeah.
Sogar. You brought one in, and now look, like
they're all here.
They're all here now.
Right. Right. So before I want to get into the final act, because it's a really beautiful ending to this movie, especially with it's funny because how like savage a hand-to-hand fight can get, how beautiful they made it with the imagery. But before that, when it's the big scene where you finally seen the sandworm Shai Hulud for the like fully realized the whole thing, the whole thing,
like it's like up,
right? So they're trekking through the desert. After Liet Kynes dies, Duncan dies. They get an ornithopter. They head out into this huge sandstorm, and we see another scene which is great because it shows, and it was a really good misdirect because you show Jameis there being his friend, because I guess it's the voices of the Bene Gesserit telling Paul, find the friend. But again, it's a possible future. It's not definitive.
This is the part that reminds you that what he's seeing is possible futures.
Right. And it's good because that's the most believable one, even to the point where I was like, oh wow, like it's gonna play out
because
this
you
way.
see that character.
Right,
like,
you do.
All the other visions that he has in the film, aside from Duncan's death, don't come to fruition in the film, other than him meeting Connie.
Yeah, it's just quick little things he sees, but it's still, like you said,
that one particular vision, you and then you see that character I want to say like 20 to 30 minutes later, and you're like, oh, that's the guy, that's him, they're going to become friends.
Yeah.
Nope.
Right. So that goes back to Stilgar being kind of on the outs with his people. You can tell, and it's Jameis leading the front of, hey, you keep bringing, you've brought multiple people in here that are not Fremen, and you keep doing this. But it's different for them because some think they're the Lisan al-Gaib, but in that siege, they don't believe it. Like, some of them generally don't. I don't even think Stilgar believes it.
And he puts it, and James puts it behind the notion that Stilgar was basically bested by Jessica. And because Stilgar's bested by Jessica, and he's like, all right, you guys can come. You can come with me. And they're like, nah.
Not even, it's Jameis specifically.
He's like, you're not in charge anymore. Like, she's more in charge than you are.
Right, because, like I said, this is supposed to mimic, like, a very kind of, like, I don't want to say savage. I feel like that's so demeaning to say savage culture, but this very very old school, and I'm not talking old school 1950s.
Yeah,
I'm talking
yeah.
I'm talking very old school, like
Native American almost.
Right, it's survival of the fittest here. It's every day. We don't live in these houses. We're living in the desert. So we need to make sure that the strongest people among us are the ones leading us. And he tells them right there, you're not the strongest of us anymore. And I forget the word they call her, but she can't fight because she is something sacred to them. So she needs a champion to fight for her to be the leader of this, because Jameis says otherwise I'm gonna be the leader, and
they ain't coming.
Yeah, right. And Paul, to end his hero's journey for this part, he steps up and says, I'll be the one to fight in my mother's name.
And again, it's a good mark for his hero's journey, because Jessica makes the observation to Stilgar, I believe, when she goes, Paul's never killed anyone before. So I don't know how this is going to go.
And it's a nice misdirect, especially to go to the future of the character, which is him turning into sort of like...
a warmonger?
And it's not even his... I mean, it kind of is, because like we said, we don't really want to get into the rest, but like, he kind of does come to peace, not to peace, but he does fully realize he is a warmonger essentially later in these books. But you get here and it kind of shows you that Messiah-esque, because usually if it's like a good, noble character, they won't kill, they'll find a way. It's like the superhero thing of like, I won't kill, I'll find another way out of this. But
kills him.
Yeah, he does. So Jameis and Paul have a really good hand-to-hand fight, witnessed by... I love the line Jameis gives, because Stilgar's like, the sun is the night's still upon us, we can't fight, the sun's coming, and then Jameis says the sun will bear witness to his death.
We're gonna fight now. We're getting this on.
Right.
And then Chani gives Paul the knife, which is...
Right. So going back to Paul's first vision, which he had when they went on the mission to find, just to see what the spice refinery would be like, he sees Chani, and afterwards, after Dr. Yue checks him out, he tells Jessica, so two very important things. One, Jessica's pregnant. That's the big part, because that's a big character that we're going to get later in the books, Paul's sister. But it's also, he says, some things are very fuzzy to me. Like, somebody gives me a knife. I don't know who or when or
this
where.
Knife, by the way, is like a sacred knife.
Right. And
from culture.
Yeah, another character from the books, shout out Mapes, gives Jessica one of the knives too. And that's the scene that leads into him being called the Lisan al-Gaib when he goes to see the trees. And you kind of see that, like I said earlier, the religious connotations of this book and this movie kind of bleeding through.
And it's a good scene when Chani gives her the knife, because he's like, this is like really sweet. This is a really touching thing. And she's like, nah, it's just going to be an honor for you to die with this knife.
Yeah, because she says, my great aunt gave me this knife. You're probably going to die holding this knife.
She's like, you should be honored.
Yeah. I just love how we know where it's going to lead, obviously, because... it's very... I don't think it's any secret that they're going to be together at some point in these books. Or in the movies, right.
It's destiny, yada, yada.
Right, but as of right now, Chani doesn't believe in him at any moment. And I love the fact that when he lands the killing blow to Jamis, she doesn't even give like that, even Stilgar gives the look, but Chani's just, okay.
Like, all right.
Yeah. Okay.
Even Jonas is like, good on you.
Yeah.
Like, you got me.
You got me. Yeah. Yeah. They're so held on those ways where she realizes, you got me. You're an honorable fighter. You're an admirable fighter, and you could be the Lisan al-Gaib. You could be. Yeah. Which leads into being the Muad'Dib. So
yeah, and the movie ends with Paul and Jessica walking off with the Fremen.
Right, and Paul, you kind of figure that he's going to start to go through the trials, and I love to see the quick shot of them all putting their hands on on his back from the trailer of him, ascending, and the scene right before. So Jessica tells Stilgar he's never killed a man, and that's where like the Bene Gesserit voices said like Paul Atreides must die for the Kwisatz Haderach to rise. It's just like climb up, like that scene got me. Like that was that really big hero moment that really got me. So really well done to kind of show him ascending into like that god character too. So
yeah, and that's where we leave it. Mm-hmm. That's where Dune Part 1 ends. And like I said, kind of misdirect. If you seen all the trailers, it just says Dune. When you go to see the movie, it says Dune, and then the title card opens Dune Part 1. Mm-hmm. And you're like, right. Okay.
Yeah. And I love at the very end of the movie, Jessica says, we need to get off world, and she still believes this, but that's his first kind of deviation from his mother. He says, we need to get off world. She's like, we need to get off world. We need to get back to Caladan so we can try to figure everything out.
We need to get back home.
Yeah, we need to get back
Paul's
home.
Like, this is home.
Yeah, this is, I'm going to be a Fremen now, and I could be a leader. Like, I might lead these people, because if I possibly am the Kwisatz Haderach now, even more so than ever. So, especially with the spice, enhancing my power, then I could really ascend. The one thing that comes from this too, that the Reverend Mother also says, is we have other prospects. He's not the only one that could be, which is a very big part for part 2. There's 3 characters that I don't even want to say, because I want this to be left in the air, which if you read the book, you'll know right away. But there are 3 characters that are very important. I mean, the Emperor's one we can't say because he's going to be in part 2. But I think you know the one that I'm talking about. That's essentially the counter to Paul who
we don't see. Whose absence, if you do know the books, whose absence is conspicuous in this film.
On purpose.
On purpose. Yeah, it's 100% on purpose.
Right.
Because that character will likely be prevalent in the next film.
They're probably going to try to get a relatively bigger actor, I would assume, to play that too, because it's a huge character. So.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's where we're going to leave it.
Yeah, overall thoughts. I mean, when you talk sci-fi, this is what you want. It's mystery, it's wonder, and I think I can't remember what movie we were talking about, but I think it was Interstellar for whatever reason in one of the past episodes. But my big thing with science fiction is there needs to be this subtlety that's captured through human emotion, and that's what it happens in Blade Runner 2049, but I mean its predecessor, the original Blade Runner, like that human emotion, like that's just the small nature of human that's every day that we'll never notice because that's how we live. But if you think about it, you'll understand, like, that's the things that need to be important for science fiction. And I mean, a filmmaker like Denis Villeneuve, that's who captures it. I mean, down to Arrival dealing with these ascendant huge alien motherships that are kind of coming to Earth, and them just simply just needing to understand them. It's just a huge lesson in communications. Going to Blade Runner 49, that fine line between AI and human, and what kind of crosses us, and can we make this, this new race of that can bridge the two of us into a greater future. And then Dune coming into this, the hero character that can essentially ascend into godhood too. That's essentially what it's about. It's like, it's the Dune's about, like, it's politics, and it's also this god, like the ascension of this god. That's what Dune is. Yeah,
basically. But yeah, I'm glad that this did well enough to get a part 2. I'm not overly surprised.
Me neither.
But I'm glad that this seems to be, the one that they got right as far as the adaptation that supposedly was unfilmable. It feels like he's got the right idea. Part 1 ended at a natural endpoint, I thought. I know a lot of people probably are upset and misdirected about Zendaya's prevalence in this film because she's not in it.
Yeah, but much. Denis Villeneuve did say that if he were to get a part 2, which I believe he knew he was going to get a part 2, that she was going to be a main character because a lot of this story is going to take place in the desert. So
she's going to be massive in the second part.
Right, so. Because they got something to do that's going to be huge. So,
yeah. I'm over the top thrilled with this movie.
Yeah. I can't believe a movie like this exists. And I know in this like modern age of getting all these Marvel movies, all these DC movies, all these Star Wars movies, that to even say that is a little, selling Hollywood short. But at the end of the day, it's that grace that it was handled with that is not present in some of the Marvel movies or the DC movies or Star Wars movies. And like I said from the beginning, that comes from Denis Villeneuve first, adapting this and loving it. It's the passion. That's what really shines through this whole thing, and that's my overall thought, is this is what an example of passion onto this big grand project looks like. It presents you with this grand world that is going to be taken care of and going to give us this huge fandom.
That's really all I gotta say. I mean, it's not all I have to say, but it's all I gotta say for the purposes of this podcast. So, Dune, like I said up top, it's well worth a watch in theaters. Looking forward to the second part, and we're finally putting it behind us. Probably won't be the last time that we talk about Dune. It'll probably pop up every now and then. Definitely. But for now, we're putting it to bed. So that's gonna do it for us. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at ProjectINF_pod. You can like us on Facebook, follow us on Facebook. You can follow us on Instagram.
At the Project Infinite Pod.
Nailed it. You can email us at theprojectinfinitepod@gmail.com, and I think that's everything.
Yeah. Played a little Guardians of the Galaxy.
Oh, yeah. We're going to talk about this more next week, but yeah, I did, because it came out today, I got into the Guardians of the Galaxy video game, produced by Square Enix and developed by Eidos Montreal, who was best known for the Deus Ex games and the Tomb Raider games, the new Tomb Raider games, and I'm really enjoying this game. Real excited to talk about it more in depth next week. But
yeah, next week's going to be fun, and doing something that we've wanted to do from the beginning is we're going to review a comic next week, which is going to be, so next week's going to be our Guardians of the Galaxy game review. Also, it's going to be an Eternals preview with Neil Gaiman's Eternals run from the early 2000s also incorporated into that. So we're going to look at the Eternals box office, the Rotten Tomatoes score, which is a really hot ticket item right now that a lot of people are talking about. So yeah, we're going to have a nice little, it's going to be more of an Eternals / MCU kind of preview for getting into the multiversal saga. That's what I want to call this new saga. Mm-hmm. We got the Infinity Saga. This feels like the multiversal or the Secret Wars that we're about to dive into. So yeah, talk a little bit about that.
I'm excited to talk about that Guardians game too, because I'm only a few hours into it, but I'm really enjoying it. It gets everything right about a video game that I particularly enjoy. Story, characters, gameplay, all top notch. It invokes a lot from one of my favorite games ever, Final Fantasy VII, particularly the remake.
Yeah, I'm looking at Sephiroth right now.
Yeah, he's on the ceiling. Yeah. It invokes a lot of that as far as character development and dialogue, especially, which was a high point for 7 Remake for me. Guardians hits similar marks. If you enjoy those characters from the MCU, you will absolutely adore them in this. But I'll talk more about that next week. Other than that, I think we're gonna sign off for this week. Dune.
Wow.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah. So next week, Guardians of the Galaxy and Eternals. Until then, we will see you next week for the Duncan, Idaho, the podcast.
I'll take it. I thought you were gonna give me like Thufir or something like that, so I'll definitely take that. You're essentially Thufir because you pull up the numbers for every movie so quickly. So yeah.
All right, guys. See you next week.